All right, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Training for Hiking live Q&A. My name is Rowan Smith, and today I'm answering your questions around training for hiking. Now, today we're going to be doing relatively short presentation. I've got a couple of questions I've had sent through today. I've got a very busy Friday ahead, so we're just going to be doing a couple of short questions. Now, essentially, what we're going to be covering today is last minute preparations before a big hike, and also talking through some ideas around reducing nausea at the start of a hike. So, to start with, let's get into it. So, last minute preparations for a big hike. Essentially, what can you do is if you just got a few weeks ahead before you head off on an adventure, and what can you squeeze in with your training? Now, this specific question came through on our Facebook group the other day and basically just said, I'm 3 weeks out from Everest Base Camp and I'm second guessing. The second guessing is hitting hard. I feel like I've been kind of doing everything you said in my training, but like before a big exam, what would you suggest I can cram in now, which would benefit me the most? I'm thinking of maybe some daily stepper sessions or maybe some extra cardio sessions in an altitude training gym, but I value your expert advice. And this is a really common question and situation that comes up because realistically, as we get closer and closer and closer to a big expedition, there's so many unknowns. We start thinking about all the other things we could have been doing in our training. We start thinking about all the little bits and pieces that could go wrong on the trail. And we kind of really just want to squeeze in everything we can before we head off. And if you are a few weeks out from a big hike and you are feeling a little bit nervous, you do need to be very intentional around how you approach this. Because one of the things I often see from hikers in this type of situation is they're like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm a little bit far behind. I feel like I haven't been doing quite enough. So all of a sudden, in the last 3 or 2 weeks, they absolutely dial up what they're doing. They just throw all this new stuff in, or they just ramp up how much walking they're doing, or whatever it may be. And while this may sound good in theory, because we're like, hey, we're just going to squeeze in some last minute training, the big risk here is any time where we do a sudden jump up in regards to how much training we're doing, whether it's new exercises, new routines, or just more of what we're doing, it does increase the risk of picking up aches, pains, and injuries. This is one of the reasons why a slow and steady approach with your training, where you can month by month build up and slowly build up, is the best because we can have a very smooth increase in things and make sure we're not jumping up suddenly and putting you at risk of things going wrong. And this is often what I'll see. People like, I'm 3 weeks out, I start doing like 3 or 4 or 5 hill sessions per week, and then all of a sudden I get this knee pain right before a trip. And it can be really nerve-wracking, it can cause a lot of anxiety, and it can just be really tricky. So we need to be smart here. Typically, in this type of situation, if you've already been doing some type of training, but you are just a little bit nervous about what's going on and you want to fit in a little bit extra, what my recommendations would be is whatever you've been doing, we don't want to add too much in. Stick with whatever you've been currently doing and essentially just take what you've been doing and just bump it up just a little bit in your final weeks if you want. So, on the strength side of things, whatever routine you've been doing for your strengthening, instead of throwing in all these new exercises or brand new workouts, just do what you've been doing and maybe add an extra set or two. So, if you've been repeating an exercise 3 or 4 times, maybe do it 4 or 5 times. That's a significant amount of extra work, but you're not learning new things, you're not having to figure things out, and it can be an easy way of going about it. Or if you're doing cardio, if you're doing, say, pack walking or stair sessions or interval sessions, just add a bit of extra time. Do an extra 15 minutes, do an extra 30 minutes, do some extra intervals or whatever it may be. And with our hiking, typically in our last about 2 to 3 weeks before we head away, that's typically when we're going to aim for our longest training hike anyway. So now's the time where you can go out and do quite a challenging hike and do it about 2 weeks before you go. That way, if things do get achy, if things do get sore, you've got plenty of time to let it relax and let it recover. So stick to your whatever you've been doing, just ramp it up a little bit. And then if you do want to do more on top of that, and you're like, well, actually, I do want to squeeze in more and more and more. I want to make the every minute count with this. Then you just want to think about what are things you can do which are going to be beneficial for your trip, but doesn't have a risk of overdoing things. And specifically for hikers, it tends to be doesn't have a risk of flaring up the feet and getting them uncomfortable before you go, or flaring up the knees and getting them uncomfortable before you go. So really good option here is filtering in some off feet conditioning. Essentially cardio activity, which doesn't put stress through the feet. So it may be cycling, like hopping on a bike outdoors or hopping on a stationary cycle, just doing some sessions there, or an elliptical or an rower, or even doing some swimming. This type of stuff, like you can't really go wrong with this if it's low intensity, if it's casual, it's not really going to flare things up, and you can layer that on top. And quite often, if I have people who are just freaking out before they go, we'll do what they're doing, and I'll just say, look, on the days that you're not doing the other training, hop on a stationary bike, do 60 minutes, 90 minutes, a couple of hours if you've got time, the inclination, that can be a nice addition. Now, if you are in the situation where you're like, you know what, I'm just so far behind and I really do need to fit in some walking based sessions, that's fine, but just don't go too crazy here. Because what I often see from people, they're like, hey, I'm going in the mountains. I'm just going to go do hill training every single day. Someone recommended that and I'm just going to do it. In all honesty, it may work, but again, if you're just ramping this hill training, this stress, this stimulus, completely ramping it up that you haven't really been gotten used to, and we do so much more than we've been doing, we don't want to put that risk of things flaring up. So if you are doing more and more and more walking, then you still want to think about how can I vary this in the training. So you may say, okay, I've been doing 3 days of training a week. I've been doing a little bit of strength and doing a little bit of walking, but I need to do more. I want to fit in maybe 2 or 3 extra sessions per week in these final things. That's okay, but just make sure it's different types of sessions. Maybe do one day where it's a flat pack walk, where you're just cruising along with a pack on your back. Maybe do one day where it's a stair session, where you're going up and down a set of stairs. Maybe do one day where it's a hill session, so you're still getting elevation, but it's a bit of a different stimulus. Maybe do one day as a hike. So you can see they're different walking based sessions, but there's a bit of variation in there. It's not just the same thing over and over and over. So, a few ideas in regards to that. And then finally, if you are doing this, even if you are really far behind, I would not recommend training hard all the way up to your trip. We still want to ensure we have a bit of a taper period just to pull things back, to give the body a little bit of a rest, give the body a bit of time to chill out before you head off. So, typically, depending on the individual, the trip, where you're at, usually we're looking about 7 to 14 days before you fly out or before you head off to your big trip, where we would want to start tapering off, where we begin to pull things back. Now, there are a million and one ways you can go about this. General rule of thumb is we still want to be doing something. It's not a case of just doing absolutely nothing and just sitting on your bum, sitting on the couch until you head off, because that's not ideal. We still want to be keeping the body moving over so it doesn't tighten up, so we can manage our nerves, manage our stress, and get through. But we also just want to make sure we're not doing so much that we start our trip exhausted. So, a really simple way to approach this, if you're looking at 14 days, so a 2 week taper, 14 days out, just take whatever you've been doing and just reduce it down by about 25%. So if you're looking at strength training, you could sort of say, if I was doing an exercise for 10 repetitions and I was using a certain amount of weight, what I'm going to do this week is I'm going to do the same routine, the same exercise, the same weight, but I'm going to reduce the reps down by 25%. So I'll do 7 repetitions as opposed to 10. And that way you finish it feeling like, hey, that was pretty easy. I could have done way more, but you still get a bit of a workout. Or alternatively, if you were doing interval training, you could reduce the intervals down by 25%, reduce the speed down by 25%, whatever. Just reduce it down a little bit. And then the final week before you go, you just reduce it down again and you take it down to like 50%. So it's really easy, but you're just ticking things over. Now, there are a million and one ways you can go about your taper, but that's a really simple way you can approach it. It doesn't take too much thought or too much effort, but it can work out pretty well. So ultimately, if you are in this situation where you're just trying to squeeze in a last little minute bits of training before you head off, that's totally fine, but just be smart about it. Don't put yourself at risk of just doing too much in a small amount of time that you're going to pick up an ache or pain before you go away. Be intentional, have some variation, be smart about it, and it can go a really long way. So hopefully that answers the question there. Hopefully that makes a little bit of difference and hopefully it gives a bit of insight. This particular question, it's come up multiple times this week and it comes up very regularly for a lot of people. So hopefully that does give a little bit of extra help. So next up, let's talk about reducing nausea at the start of hikes. So reducing nausea at the start of hikes. The situation here, this happened to a client of ours, or sorry, let's start that again. So reducing nausea at the start of hikes, a really common thing that a lot of hikers will face when they just start an adventure. They start a hike and within 20 minutes, 30 minutes, they start feeling a bit gross, a bit nasty. They need to have a little bit of a break. Now, this sort of came up with someone we were talking with the other day, and they were just mentioning, look, this tends to happen quite a bit for me. Within the first 30 minutes of a hike, I do feel a little bit sick to my stomach and lightheaded. And I find that if I stop and rest and eat a banana, drink a bit of water, I tend to recover in about 15 minutes or so. Realistically, in any situation with your hiking, whether this is immediately in the beginnings of your hiking, further down the line in tougher sections, if you are getting to the stage where you're getting nauseous, you're getting sick, you're feeling gross in your stomach or whatever it may be, something does need to change. Because ultimately, hiking shouldn't really be getting you to this time point. Hiking is technically a lower intensity occupation. Yes, it is challenging. Yes, it does have its situations where it can really push the body, but typically it should be lower intensity. On top of that, hiking is something that should be fun. We shouldn't be getting to this point where we feel gross, where we feel nasty. We want to make sure we are being smart about this and working around. Now, if you are in this situation where you are getting a little bit nauseous, there's a few things which can make a bit of a difference, both in the longer term and the shorter term. Now, before we even get to that, let's just talk about where this nausea typically comes from. And this won't be in every situation, but for the most part. Usually, it's one of three things, or a combination of three things. Number one, intensity. Ultimately, if we are walking at a pace and if we are hiking at a pace which is just a bit too quick for us, we're going at a pace which gets us huffed and puffed, gets the heart rate up really high, or whatever it may be, this can often be a sign of saying we are going a little bit too quick. So instead of using our aerobic energy systems, which is our aerobic energy system designed for low intensity, long duration exercise, which we want for our hiking, instead of using that, we are going at a speed where we're actually pushing into our anaerobic energy systems, which are designed for short bursts of speed. The tricky thing with these anaerobic energy systems is because they are designed for short bursts of speed, they're not designed to sustain for really long periods of time. They do have things that are associated with those energy systems which can make us feel a bit gross, make us feel a bit nasty. So if we're walking at a speed where we're actually pushing in these higher intensities and working these anaerobic energy systems more and more and more, this can be a factor which can lead into nausea. So number one, it could be a factor of intensity. Number two, it could be fueling. Ultimately, if you're in a situation where you are pushing your speed and you are going a bit quicker than usual, the body will be churning through fuel quite a bit. The body will be wanting carbohydrates. The harder we push, the quicker we go, the more intense we do exercise, the body wants more and more and more carbohydrates. And in this situation, if we're hiking, say, first thing in the morning and we don't really like to eat breakfast and we're starting the day and we have an empty stomach, and then we're trying to push these speeds and the body's like, hey, I really want carbohydrates, but I don't have enough here, this can lead to us feeling a little bit gross. So that could be a factor. Or on the flip side of that, it also could be digestion. In one situation, it could be, hey, we don't have enough food. Alternatively, if it's a morning hike and you've had breakfast, but you've maybe had breakfast which is still digesting and you're starting this hike and you're pushing the speed, this can actually lead to a little bit of that nausea. So it could go the other way. So it's usually a combination of, one or two of these factors when it comes down to it. So talking solutions, let's talk about long-term solutions first. Now, in all honesty, the simplest or the most effective way to make a difference here is your training. In the sense that over the long term, if we can do the right training and develop the right things in our body, we can make this much more comfortable. Number one, what we can do is we can reduce the relative intensity of what we're doing. What that means, if we're entering our hikes and our aerobic fitness is a little bit underdeveloped and we're going at these speeds and it's pushing more and more and more into the anaerobic stuff, well, with our training, if we can actually develop our aerobic energy system, if we can increase it, make it more efficient, make it more effective, we can actually rely on that more and more and more at these higher intensities. Meaning, when we're pushing these speeds and we're walking on the trail, we can rely on our aerobic energy system. We don't get that gross feeling, and it can be very beneficial. This is literally just improving our fitness in this capacity. How do we do this? Well, simplest thing, lower intensity, long duration cardio. Pack walking, cycling, elliptical, gentle hiking, which doesn't get us feeling gross or whatever it may be. Just periods where we can just go for long periods at low intensity. Very, very simple, but very, very effective. Now, on top of that, with our training, we can also improve our body's ability to tolerate these intensities a little bit more. So if we do get a little bit gross when we're going at these speeds, we can actually teach the body to handle these speeds and handle these things a little bit better. So the things that make us feel a little bit gross, they don't actually affect us quite as much. So essentially what this does, it just allows us to go at these higher intensity things, just feeling a bit more comfortable. So essentially, we can do this by, again, just training this, like doing things like stairs or hills, where we are going at slightly quicker speeds or higher intensities, sustaining this, enduring this, and developing things in the body to help us get through. Or we might do interval training, hop on a bike or a rower or an elliptical, and do periods where you're going relatively quick for 3 or 4 minutes, have a bit of a rest, and do it again. This type of stuff can be very, very effective here. Now, all the training side of stuff, like that's the typical stuff we would approach any type of hiker, whether you are getting nauseous or not. All of this stuff would go into a normal training for hiking program. Drawback to this, and why I say this is long-term solutions, this can take a while to kick into effect. Fitness doesn't happen overnight. It takes the consistent application of training week after week and sometimes month after month for things to start to turn around. So, in the short term, what can you do? Well, very, very simple. Number one, pacing. As I said, a lot of the factor with all of this is its intensity. If we are going at a speed which is just a bit too quick for us, if we can change that around and actually go at a speed which isn't quick for us, that can reduce that nausea. Really simple rule of thumb for pacing is going at a speed when you're hiking where you can either comfortably breathe in and out through your nose, or if that's a little bit weird for you, if you've got a small nose or a blocked nose or whatever it may be, at a pace where you can comfortably carry a conversation. If you're going at a pace where you're huffing and puffing in between words, or you're really quite out of breath or whatever it may be, well, pull things back, slow it down. And I promise you, if you can just get a little bit better with the pacing, that'll make a dramatic difference to that nausea. Now, sometimes this can be a little bit tricky if we're going out with other people who may be a bit quicker than us. On top of that is if we are maybe a naturally slower hiker. So this does require a bit of a conversation with your hiking partners and just sort of say, hey, do you mind if I set the speed? Hey, do you mind if I just go a little bit slower or whatever it may be? Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. Now, if this is just not super possible, maybe you're going out with a hiking tour group or a local hiking club or whatever it may be, or maybe you're just a bit self-conscious about having that kind of conversation, then another thing that can help here is just having a bit of a warm-up before you hike. For most hikers, you can start hiking, just roll onto the trail and just start moving, and that can count as your warm-up. But if you're in this situation where you kind of just immediately hit the trail and you start feeling a bit gross, sometimes just doing some things before you move can help. So in this situation, I'd recommend getting to the trailhead a little bit early. So if you've got your own transportation, trying to get there 15, 20 minutes before the hike actually starts may not always be possible, but if so, and then just trying to do something before you actually start hiking where you can stretch the legs, where you can get the blood moving, get things sort of the heart rate up a little bit. So essentially, you get to the trailhead, you get the body and the heart rate up, you let it settle a little bit, and then you start hiking. And the idea behind that is it just prepares the body for the demands of hiking. So instead of going from 0 to 100 and all of a sudden feeling gross, you can kind of go from 0 to 50 to 100, if that makes sense. So that can be an option. Logistically, it doesn't always work, but it definitely can be an option. And then the other flip side of things is fueling, just making sure we are getting the right balance of fuel leading into this type of stuff. Typically, I usually say try to get a bit of type of food into you before hiking. I'm trying to get some type of fuel in there because hiking is exercise. You can survive on an empty stomach, but it's not usually the best. So getting some type of fuel in can definitely make a big difference. Typically, what we really want in this type of situation is some type of carbohydrates. When we are exercising, the body does have a limited storage of carbohydrates. And essentially, when we're exercising, we burn through them over a period of time. So we just want to make sure we are having plenty of carbs before we start, and also as you go, typically topping that up. Now, usually in the morning, we may not want to sit down or wake up at the crack of dawn and have a really, really long breakfast. So, generally, what we want to be thinking about when we're looking at breakfast before hiking is just something easy and quick to digest. So, something that's low protein, low fat, low fiber, high carbohydrate. The idea behind that, low protein, low fat, low fiber, all of those things slow down digestion, which is fine if we're sitting around day to day life, whatever it may be. But if we're trying to eat and then all of a sudden hike, we don't want that food sitting in the stomach. So low protein, low fiber, protein, low fat. So this may be a case of just having a piece of fruit or even like half a banana if you can't stomach much. Might be something like having a piece of white toast or a bagel or something like that. Or even just having like a handful of like breakfast cereal and literally without even the milk, just like munching on some breakfast cereal as you go through or anything like that. Or alternatively, if you do feel like even that is just a little bit hard to stomach, maybe some liquid calories. Liquid calories are generally easier to digest and get in as opposed to that. So it may be a case of saying, okay, in the morning, I'm just going to make up look a little like electrolyte supplement with some carbohydrates. We're just going to sip a little of that in the morning. You don't have to have a full blown serving or whatever it may be, but just have a little bit of it, or maybe have some fruit juice or something like that, and just have a little bit of a drink. Um, on the flip side, as we sort of said before, sometimes digestion can be the factor. So if you're actually already eating in the morning, but you're hitting the trail and you feel like, hey, my food is actually sitting in my stomach and it feels a bit gross and that's feeling a bit nasty, then follow these similar guidelines as well. Maybe maybe you're having quite a bit of protein in the morning, which is usually fine. But if we're trying to exercise right after, it can sometimes sit in the stomach a little bit. So just follow these guidelines again: high carb, low protein, low fat, low fiber. Generally for breakfast, if we're just hitting the trail, that can work out pretty well. If you do have like an hour or two between breakfast and when you're hiking, then you can have a bit more flexibility. But sometimes crack of dawn hiking, that can go a long way. And then finally, in this type of situation, we always do want to enter our hikes hydrated as well. So before you leave home, just go to the toilet. Have a look at your urine color. If it's clear to straw colored, you're good to go. If it's a little bit darker than that, just have another glass of water before you head off. So ultimately, if you are in this situation where you are getting a little bit nauseous at the start of hikes, long-term solution, your training is going to make a big difference. Short-term solution, look at your pacing, look at your fueling, look after those things. It can really make a big difference because ultimately, as I said before, hiking should be fun. We shouldn't really be getting to that point where we're getting nasty, getting sick. So there are solutions out there. Play around with them. Some of it will take a little bit while to put into action or to figure out exactly what works best for you. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of advice and a little bit of help. So, with that being said, that is that. And that's the last question I kind of had sent through. So, if nothing else has kind of come through live today, I might wrap things up from there because, as I said at the start of this call, I've got a crazy busy afternoon and a million things to work through. So, with that being said, for anyone watching live, I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope you got a little bit out of it. If anyone does have any questions they would like me to cover in the future, feel free to flick them over to me, email them, post them up in the group, or whatever it may be. I'm happy to cover them all. But with that being said, I hope everyone has a lovely Friday. Hope everyone has a lovely weekend, and we'll talk to you.